Want to learn alchemy? I'm not talking about a resort trip that'll cost you $500 in order to teach you how to meditate and find yourself. I'm talking about the real stuff here. Today's lesson is about dissolution, or the element to use today, agua. There are 12 stages to the alchemical process. Last video we talked about calcination. Calcination was the process in which we burn away all impurities and we turn other items into powders, such as lye or sugar or flour or cornstarch or all kinds of other items. Powdered eggshell was another thing for calcium carbonate. The processes, as I said before, are calcination, dissolution, separation, conjunction, putrefaction, congelation, cibation, sublimation, fermentation, exaltation, multiplication, and projection. All of these processes don't need to be in an exact order in order for you to reach your magnum opus or your great work. So what is dissolution? Dissolution is a process where a solid, a liquid, or a gas can then be dissolved into a solution. The best example, obviously, would be if you added salt to water and then you brought it up to a boil. The salt would dissolve and then become a part of the water, making it more saline while losing all the particles. Another example would be if you ever tried to make simple syrup. Simple syrup is made by just adding equal parts of sugar to water, 1 cup water, 1 cup sugar. And then what you're going to do is you're just going to dissolve it you're going to boil it. And then as soon as it comes to a boil, you're going to lower it very slowly so that way it can come together. And then it will dissolve all the sugar. And then boom, you have simple syrup that you can put in your coffee. The more extreme version of this, and then eventually it becomes crystallization, which is a whole other process, would be if you were to try to make candy. You keep boiling it down until it gets a hard crack and the water is almost completely dissolved, leaving only the sugar, which is basically as hard as glass at that point. We use dissolution to make marinades. We use dissolution to make brines. We use dissolution to make salad dressings. When you are sautéing something, at the bottom of the pan, there's something called a fond, which is a very brown substance that is all the delicious caramelized bits that happen to stick to the bottom of the pan. If you end up then deglazing it, which would be helping that item unattach itself, but add a lot more flavor to the dish later on, you would add wine, or you would add stock, or you would add water, and that will pull the stuff off the bottom, but all of that deliciousness, all of that caramelization and sugars and all of the other flavors that are infused with the vegetables and meat that you put in will then be put into the stock and give it a lot more richness and overlap as far as the flavors go. If we want to apply some of the principles of calcination earlier, you can do something like burn a shitload of wood, and then that will be very high in alkaline. You save the ashes from the wood, you dissolve that in a certain amount of water, and now you have something that is an incredibly abrasive, like liquid or like sludge that you then use to usually make soap, because what you're making is you're making lye. So now you can use it to scrub clothes and clean all kinds of things, but make very sure that it doesn't touch your sweaty hands because it will cause a chemical burn. Just like I talked before about how there is dry heat and moist heat and dry cold and moist cold and the principles of alchemy and cooking as far as they overlap. The starting phase usually starts with the item being dried out, and then you can extract the most amount of essence through the water. So if you had, a lot of people like to talk about how bay leaves don't have any flavor. Well, you really want to understand how a bay leaf smells and tastes. Put 2 bay leaves inside of maybe a pint of water, bring it to a boil, let it cool, and then take a sip of that, and then now you'll understand what the essence of bay leaf or thyme or rosemary might have. This is very similar to making an herbal tea for yourself, except it'll be a little strong, and it will have a lot more health benefits than obviously like having pre-made ground stuff. If you've ever made ramen noodles before, that's a really good example of dissolution. And what that is you have that MSG packet filled with all kinds of delicious spices and flavors. You throw that in the water, and then it dissolves, and now boom, the water is basically infused with like a very cheap version of adashi. Extracting the flavor and the essence out of each of those items can also be used to make stocks or broths. You are cutting up a bunch of raw vegetables that can be quite astringent, especially onions, which can be quite stingy. And then you're either sauteing them and then adding water, or you are bringing it all up and you're just taking all of that bitterness out of the vegetables. And now the stock is infused with a shitload of nutrients and vitamins and minerals and stuff that you've added in order to make the broth a lot more powerful for your body to consume than if you individually ate 2 pieces of celery, 2 pieces of carrot, and drank a cup of water. Last video, I talked about how you can make calcium carbonate out of cooked eggshells that you put in the oven and then you blitz into a powder. Well, if you add enough water to those, then you can turn it back into a chalk. Or if you add an emulsifier into it, like an oil or anything like that, you can turn it into a paint or a brightener for a paint. And just like those eggshells can be made into chalk, chalk can then be dissolved again. Point is that water is the main element that is required in order to make this work. Heat is the secondary element. You need the water in order to be a conduit for the item to dissolve in, and then you need the heat in order to generate energy in order to help the water dissolve the item much faster. So like if you put sugar at the bottom of a container of cold water, no matter how much you shake it, it's never going to dissolve. But if you boil it for even a half a minute, or you even get it up to a certain amount of heat, it will dissolve, and then it will acquire a new property. It can be like liquid sugar is, you know, technically napalm if you were in jail and you wanted to chuck it at somebody's face, theoretically. In the culinary process of boiling, what you're doing is you're adding a lot of heat energy to the water until eventually it reaches a maximum output. Boiling water can only reach 212 degrees Fahrenheit. That is the maximum amount of degrees that it can reach. If you wish to reach higher, you would need more pressure, which is usually steam. That's why we have pressure cookers and things like that, which when you think about a slow cooker, that takes usually all day long, and usually the end result ends up quite greasy. As where when you use a pressure cooker, if you want to break down a really tough cut of meat or anything that's like really hardy and difficult to break down, it takes a long time and long cooking and all that extra shit. Pressure cooker will break it down in absolutely no time at all. Now, if boiling was at the 100%, if 212 is the maximum, then what you would want to achieve in order to make sure that you're not basically bruising all of the items, if you were to make a stock like with bones or anything like that, you would bring it up to a boil and then you bring it down to a simmer. A boil would have water that goes ba 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 ba, very active, right? And a simmer would just have the water having tiny little gentle bubbles around the corner. In order for you to distribute the energy equally, you would keep stirring it. How the physics of it work is if you stir to the right in circles, the food will cool faster towards the bottom, and if you stir towards the left, it will bring everything up. It's kind of like how a spiral would always be a whirlpool that faces right, and if you wanted a tornado, you would always shoot upwards. A good temperature for a simmer is usually like 167. That also happens to be like the golden number if you ever wanted to make a dashi, where if you brought up like bonito flakes and kombu and shiitake mushrooms, you would soak them overnight, and then even if you did bring them up, you would bring them to 167 about, and then right when it gets there, you drop it, because if you overboil it, it will end up making the stock or water or broth or dashi incredibly cloudy, and it will spoil much faster, and it won't be as clear. And clarity is key, especially if you're trying to achieve a perfect result, like a consomme in your culinary alchemy. If you wish to take the bitterness out of something, you would instead actually put it in a cold environment. Similar to how if you have ever had coffee before, if you have boiling coffee, it always turns out to be a little bit harsher and bitter on your palate and sticks a little bit more to your tongue. As where if you've ever had cold brew coffee, where it's been just kept in cold water overnight and it's extracted all the flavor, it somehow has just gotten rid of all the bitterness, but kept, you know, the caffeine dosage and like that kind of acidity that is very unpleasant for some people. If you have any questions about any of the culinary processes, such as boiling or simmering or anything like that, please feel free to ask me, because I know a great deal about cooking. Bye-bye.